Okay, so feature theory and constraints and phonological knowledge are good for helping to explain why words can be pronounced in some ways in a language and not in other ways. And we've seen that a lot of these rules apply to certain kinds of natural classes. That's one of the reasons why we think that phonological feature theory is a good way to approach sound patterns. But it's not just possible sequences of sounds and possible words or impossible words. It's also the case that every language makes use of a restricted set of sounds in general, that there's only certain kinds of sounds in a language, not every conceivable speech sound, but only a limited set. And we refer to that set as the inventory, the phonological or phonemic inventory of a language. Right? And so some of these examples we've already looked at are basically illustrating this. Right? So the Pnock example is illustrating something different because English has voiceless labial stops like p, and it has alveolar nasals like n, but it just doesn't allow them next to each other at the beginning of a word, as in Pnock. The other example, however, the oop example, that's really not about sequences of sounds. It's just about what kinds of sounds English allows in general. Right? So English doesn't make any use, or at least no systematic use, of sounds like k or ch, a velar fricative. And more generally, it's not just about, the absence of this ka sound. It's just that more generally, English never uses plus constricted glottis to encode contrasts. Right? So we don't have any ejective consonants. We have a glottal stop in our language, but it's not really a contrastive sound. It's completely predictable where that occurs. It's generally at the beginning of a phrase that would otherwise begin with a vowel. Right? So it's not like the difference between an egg and an egg is contrastive in English. The first one had no glottal stop before egg, the second one did. That's not a fact about the inventory of English because it can't distinguish word meanings from one another. So these kinds of features and constraints are also going to be useful for ruling out unallowed sounds in a language, for characterizing the phonemic inventory of a language, right? And again, this is not about single segments, it's about natural classes, right? So written on the handout is this constraint against ejective consonants or constricted glottis consonants written as a rule, right? And how would you do that? Well, you'd say, if you're a consonant in English, then you are predictably minus constricted glottis, and there's no environment here because the environment would be everywhere. This is a context-free constraint. It's an inventory constraint on English. Or sorry, this is a rule, but it's a context-free rule that says that all consonants everywhere in the language are minus constricted glottis. This can also, of course, be written as a constraint. You would just say, I don't remember, did I put the consonant in here? Oh, I didn't write this on the handout. You could either do this as don't have a consonant that's constricted glottis, or, I mean, you don't even really need the consonantal part because we don't have vowels that are constricted glottis either. So you could just write this constraint as star plus constricted glottis. And that's going to apply to every single sound in the language. And it's going to be an inviolable, in this case, inventory constraint that just says English doesn't have constricted glottis sounds. They just don't exist in English. The other example here, the velar fricative ch, you could also write this as either a rule or constraint. This is going to be, again, a fact about the English inventory. Dorsal consonants in English are all minus continuant. Right? So as a rule, this is as shown on the handout, you would say that dorsal consonants, plus consonantal plus dorsal, they're predictably minus continuant. That is, they're going to be either stops or nasals. Right? And the context, again, is everywhere. This is a context-free constraint, or a context-free rule, rather. As a constraint, you could do exactly the same thing. And again, you can include or not include the consonantal part. We don't really need it, so I'll leave it out. But don't have a sound that's dorsal and a continuant. We just don't allow things like this in English. So that would rule out ch, it would rule out voiced ra, it would rule out the velar approximant ra, it would rule out all sorts of things, all of which don't exist in English because all dorsal consonants in English are either stops or nasals. They're minus continuants. So we have ka and ga and engma, but we don't have any continuant dorsal sounds. So again, you can write it as a constraint, you can write it as a rule, and either one is fine. But we're mostly going to be working with the constraints this semester. I want you to understand the relationship between rules and constraints. Oh, last question here. Why is this constraint restricted to dorsals? Why does it have this plus dorsal piece in it? And why is the corresponding rule restricted to dorsals? The answer is because other places of articulation do have both minus continuant and plus continuant consonants. You wouldn't want this to apply to labials, otherwise it would rule out fa and va and wa. So that's why it's restricted to only the dorsal place of articulation. English has coronal fricatives and labial fricatives and a palatal glide, but it doesn't have any dorsal continuants at all. There's a couple exercises here. I should say before that, allowable combinations of features in general, anywhere in a language, is referred to as the inventory of that language, right? The lack of ch and ka in English is not about any particular position in the word or whether it's next to the right vowel or not. It's just a fact about all English sounds, sound patterns and sound structures. They never have ejectives or velar fricatives in them. It's just a fact about English. So these are inventory constraints on English. And the things that are allowed in English are called the inventory, the phonological inventory or the phonemic inventory of English. It doesn't include things like ejectives and velar continuants. Here's a few exercises that are probably worth doing. These are just trying to write filters, write constraints or rules, whatever you prefer, to express the following inventory restrictions in English. And there's lots and lots and lots of restrictions on phoneme inventories in every language. These ones are specific to English. Your language, if it's not English, will also have lots of inventory constraints. Right? So here's the first one. English allows vowels like oo and o, but no vowels like and Take a minute. Okay, first, as a generalization, I would say that English allows back-rounded vowels, but no non-low back unrounded vowels. So, star. I'm going to leave out the syllabic part. You can put that in for clarity, just to say, hey, we're talking about vowels. But usually it's kind of redundant because only vowels are specified for backness and roundness to begin with. So I'll say, don't have a back vowel that's non-low and non-round. There's a constraint. In fact, we've already seen this. It was in the previous handout, and we talked about it during the third assignment, as well as the section of the class on vowels, right? So don't have any non-low back unrounded vowels, or stated as a rule, you could say that non-low back vowels in English are predictably plus round. That would be a rule formation, and that's going to be true everywhere. There's no context for that, right? Why are we limiting it to minus low? Because we do have this low back unrounded vowel ah, and that would be an exception if we didn't include the minus low feature. Why are we limiting it to plus back? Because we do have non-low front vowels like e, a, and that are minus round, right? So this is just singling out the natural class of vowels that are disallowed in English. Again, by combining features to make natural classes. Next one, star, e, and oo. Sorry, this is meant to deal with the phonetic length of vowels in English. We do have longish vowels like e and oo, but we don't have short vowels like I and U. So try to formulate that. Okay, I would say that this is a fact about tenseness and length, right? So one of the things we saw when we looked at this tense-lax distinction in English is that tense vowels are way longer than lax ones. And so in general, the lax vowels would be short, but the tense vowels are going to be long. So expressed as a constraint, we could say, don't have tense vowels that are short, or I'm going to call it minus long. It doesn't really matter. You could call it plus short. You could call it minus long. Kind of the same difference. As a rule, we could write this as saying a plus tense sound in English is predictably long in all contexts. And this would be as opposed to lax vowels, which can be minus long. They can be short. In fact, they can't be long. So that's how we would write that one. How about this next one where there's some special diacritics on those nasals? So we have sounds like ma, na, na in English, but we don't have sounds like ha, na, na. And it might be hard for you to hear what I'm doing there. I also might not be doing it beautifully, but see if you can figure out what those diacritics are and what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that second set with the diacritics, those were voiceless nasals. And that's, depending on the language, they might be really, really voiceless, or they might be what's sometimes called murmured or breathy voiced. So it's not that easy to produce a fully voiceless nasal sound. Often what it really is a kind of disturbance in the voicing that has to do with the stiffness of the vocal folds. But anyhow, that's not really important. The point is just that in English we have voiced nasal consonants, but no voiceless ones. And so as a constraint, we could say, don't have any nasal sounds that are minus voice. We could also add consonants to this, although it's also the case that we don't have voiceless nasal vowels, so we don't really need that feature. And this is a constraint that says, hey, if you are voiceless nasal, you're not part of an English word. As a rule, we could also say that plus nasal sounds in English are predictably minus voice everywhere, right? So plus nasal, arrow, minus voice, and then you can leave out the environment entirely, or you can write everywhere if you want to be maximally clear. These are the kinds of restrictions on the English inventory, phonemic inventory, that we're going to need to capture as part of our theory of phonology. Right? This is not facts about the history of the English lexicon. It's not an accident that these sounds don't exist. This is part of our active phonological knowledge, our function, which filters a range of potential input sounds that could have arisen in English and does not allow them to do so. Right? You can characterize that kind of a functional system using these constraints, or you can do it using rules. And both of them are useful and are worth knowing, but they do slightly different things.